quiet, strategic, calculating. And in the 10 days after my appointment, they came for me from every direction. But they forgot something. I'd been invisible once. Never again. The first attack. My first morning as interim COO began with a bomb that wasn't explosive, but bureaucratic. A 107-page document filed with the board's governance committee accusing me of overstepping authority, inexperience, financial misjudgment, compromising internal stability, personal vendetta driving decisions. At the bottom of the complaint? Victoria's lawyer's signature. Of course. I closed the document calmly and walked into the operations floor. Everyone froze, watching me. Then I said, "Morning," like nothing was wrong. Because panic is contagious, but so is composure. Priya, Treasury, ran up to me. "They're trying to destabilize you," she whispered. This came from her. "She's pushing to invalidate the board vote." "Let her try," I said. "We'll answer with numbers." That afternoon, I presented a full stability plan to the board. Liquidity corrections, vendor renegotiations, an operational freeze on acquisitions, internal audits requested by me, not by them, a roadmap that saved $11.2 million. They couldn't argue with the math. Even Wesley, who had called me a junior nobody days earlier, muttered, "Impressive." The complaint lost power. Victoria lost ground. Round 1 was mine. But the war had just started. The media strike. 2 days later, a headline exploded online. Revell Dynamics appoints an inexperienced analyst to executive leadership, stock dips. The article painted me as a misguided affirmative action pick, a panicked appointment, a woman driven by revenge. The comments were vicious. And at the bottom of the article? A quote from an unnamed, former employee. I didn't need a psychic to know who it was. Victoria wasn't just trying to destroy me internally. She was going for the public kill. At lunch, I sat alone in my office, scrolling through attacks. Unqualified. Reject. Clearly slept her way up. Diversity hire. Pathetic revenge story. My chest tightened. For a moment, a small, bitter moment, I almost felt like the woman in the restroom mirror months ago. Fragile. Humiliated. Rejected. But something inside me snapped instead. A voice that wasn't afraid anymore. A voice sharpened by fire. "She can take my name," I whispered, "but she can't take my truth." I closed the article. Straightened my blazer. Walked into the next meeting like I owned the building. Because one day, I would. Sabotage from within. The third attack came from someone I didn't expect. The CFO. A man who once praised my models now resented the power shift. He cornered me before a budget review meeting. "You don't belong here," he whispered. "You don't have the maturity for this." "I have the numbers," I said quietly. "And the trust of the board." He leaned in, eyes narrow. "Not all of them." Then he walked into the meeting and presented a distorted version of my projections, making my plan look reckless. An intentional sabotage. The board's eyes flicked toward me. Waiting. Studying. Testing. And then, the moment that changed everything. Elena Marquez, audit head, placed a second binder on the table. "Actually," she said, "we ran a parallel review. The COO's numbers are accurate. The CFO's version is not." The CFO froze. Ashford leaned back slowly. "This is misrepresentation," he said sharply. "One more stunt like this and you're done." The CFO kept silent. He had tried to crush me with manipulation. He didn't expect I'd get protection from the one board member Victoria feared most. When the meeting ended, Elena walked past me. "Keep going," she murmured. "You're closer than you think." Victoria's desperation. The next blow wasn't strategic. It was unhinged. Victoria showed up at the building lobby, screaming that she wanted her job back. Security escorted her out as she shouted, "That little reject stole my company. She's nothing. Nothing." Employees watched from balconies and stairwells. A CEO, reduced to a public meltdown. Her reputation died that day, not because of me, but because of her. Later, she sent an email to the entire board accusing me of hacking, extortion, emotional manipulation, fraud. And she CC'd the HR general inbox, as if that would help her. The board ignored the email. The HR team forwarded it to legal. Her downfall wasn't a crash. It was a decay. The takeover blueprint. With Victoria imploding publicly, the company needed stability. But stability without strategy is useless. And I had a strategy, a dangerous one that needed precision. I met Gavin, the investor, at a private restaurant overlooking the river. "Your share valuation report," he said, sliding a folder across the table, "is spectacular. This company is severely undervalued. If we acquire 38%, we control it." I nodded. "Management buyout?" he asked. "No," I replied. "Shadow acquisition." He raised a brow. "Explain." "We acquire minority stakes through independent vehicles. We accumulate quietly. We buy during dips, created by the instability Victoria caused. Then we offer a stabilization purchase to the board when they're desperate." He stared at me. Then he smiled slowly. "You're a shark," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm the thing sharks fear." He leaned back. "So why should you run this company? You're brilliant, but brilliance isn't leadership." I met his eyes. "Because I understand the damage Victoria caused. Because I understand the employees she broke. Because I've lived at the bottom of her cruelty and risen from it. Because they trust me. And because I will never treat people the way she did." He nodded once. "Then let's do it." That night, I went home with a heavy folder in my bag. The takeover blueprint. My blueprint. The final betrayal. But the war wasn't done. Because the CFO, the one who tried to sabotage my numbers, wasn't finished. At 11:43 p.m., I received an anonymous message. "Check the outgoing transfers tonight." I logged into the Treasury dashboard. My blood ran cold. The CFO was initiating a massive fund movement, a move that could signal distress and send investors spiraling. A move that could destroy the company. A move that could sabotage me. I grabbed my phone and sprinted out of my apartment, calling Priya. "Stop the transfer." I shouted into the night air. "I'm trying," he has override permissions. "Then lock the conduit." "I can't without legal." I called Matteo. "Authorize an emergency freeze." I yelled. Matteo cursed. "He's violating protocol. That's liquidation signaling." "Exactly. He's trying to tank the stock." We coordinated in real time, 3 people who once worked in separate corners of the company now fighting like a synchronized unit. At 11:57 p.m., we froze the account. At 11:59 p.m., the CFO was locked out of the system. At 12:04 a.m., Elena sent me 2 words. "He's finished." And at 12:07 a.m., I realized something. This war wasn't about Victoria anymore. It was about the company. One I would soon own. The CFO has been exposed. Victoria is spiraling. The board is unstable. Your acquisition plan is nearly ready. The company is weakened, perfectly timed. Now comes the final takeover. Shall I continue with? She called me a reject, now I own her company. Some victories arrive with applause. Mine arrived in silence. The kind of silence that fills a building when everyone senses change coming, not the gentle kind, but the tectonic kind. The kind that reshapes structures. The kind that ends eras. My second decision: be invisible while I grew visible. That sounds like a paradox, but it's how influence is often built. I would do small, undeniably valuable things that no one could ignore. I volunteered for cross-department projects, stayed late to help close messy reports, fixed reconciliation errors that had baffled others, and quietly supported teams who were drowning under the weight of Victoria's decisions. People began to notice my competence. Not the performative notice Victoria loved, flashy praise at all hands, but the steady kind that comes when someone reliably steadies the ship. At the same time, I built relationships. I cultivated a handful of allies: Dina in procurement, Matteo in legal, and Priya in treasury. Each one had access to different slabs of truth. Dina kept vendor agreements and whispered about suppliers who'd moved from reliable to expensive overnight. Matteo had a talent for reading contract clauses for exits and escape hatches. Priya, quietly brilliant, tracked daily cash positions like a hawk. I didn't recruit them for loyalty. I found them because they were obsessives like me, people who cared more about precision than power. While I cultivated allies, I also cultivated information architecture. I kept copies of everything relevant in a secure, offline place, encrypted drives and a physical binder with printed summaries. If you've worked in finance long enough, you learn the rule: systems can be altered, but paper traces are stubborn. I cataloged vendor name changes, tracked recurring, consultancy, payments that smelled like kickbacks, and annotated every odd accounting entry with potential interpretations. Each item in my binder became a node in a case I might someday present. Opportunity, as it often does, arrived disguised as necessity. The board's panic. Another emergency session was called. This time, the boardroom felt less like a seat of authority and more like a bunker. Ashford closed the blinds. Wesley looked agitated, tapping his pen at twice the normal speed. Claire reviewed documents as if they were battle plans. And then I entered. Their eyes snapped toward me. Not dismissive. Not condescending. Respectful. Wary. And beneath that, hopeful. Ashford cleared his throat. "We're being targeted," he said. "No," I corrected gently. "You're being stabilized." Wesley scoffed. "Buying 24% of our shares is not stabilization." "Buying them quietly," I said, "prevented a hostile takeover by someone else." Elena nodded slowly. "She prevented a bigger crisis." Ashford looked between us. "A group is making the purchases," he said. "Do you know who they are?" I held his gaze. "Yes." Wesley snapped his head toward me. "You're involved?" I didn't blink. "Yes." The room stilled. Ashford leaned forward. "What is your intention?" I took a breath. "Simple," I said. "To restore this company. To lead it. To own it. And to end the culture that nearly destroyed it." Silence. Then Elena spoke. "I vote we support her." Wesley sputtered. "This is insane." But Claire cut him off. "She's already saved us more than once. None of US can stabilize operations like she can." The room fractured, a civil war of whispers. When the vote was called. 4 yes. 3 no. Enough. Just enough. I walked out of the boardroom with my authority cemented. Not total ownership yet. But inevitable. The final collapse of Victoria Hale. You would think someone like Victoria, the fire-breathing tyrant, would go out with a dramatic explosion. But her destruction arrived in the quietest way. A legal suspension notice. A securities violation charge. A breach of fiduciary duty. A formal removal of executive privileges. Slow. Orderly. Precise. Death by paperwork. The board sent a courier to her home with the official document. Victoria Hale is permanently removed from all positions at Revell Dynamics, effective immediately. I heard she screamed, cried, threatened lawsuits, threatened revenge, threatened anything she could think of. But in the end, she sat alone in her luxury condo, surrounded by the ruins of the empire she ruled through fear. She had spent years calling people beneath her reject, weak, nothing. Now she was the one with nothing. And I was leading the company she once destroyed. The final step toward ownership. 3 days later, the stock dipped again, a minor fluctuation caused by external market forces. It was the window I'd waited for. I called Gavin at 6:42 a.m. Now, I said. By 10 a.m., our ownership stake crossed 32%. Control territory. By 11:30 a.m., the market noticed. By noon, it triggered alerts. By 12:17 p.m., the board demanded a meeting. And at 1 p.m., I stood in front of them with the calm confidence of someone who had climbed through hell and come out steel. Wesley was the first to speak. "So this is your plan," he said bitterly. "To buy us?" "No," I corrected. "To save us." "You think you can run this company?" he asked. "Yes." "You think the employees will follow you?" "They already do." "You think the market will trust you?" "They already trust the numbers I fixed." He clenched his jaw. Then Ashford leaned back. "Miss," he said quietly, "what do you want?" This was the moment. The line in the sand. My microphone before the world. I looked around the room, men and women who had doubted me, ignored me, dismissed me, and then relied on me to save them. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't try to sound dramatic. I said the simplest truth. I want to lead the company that called me a reject. Ashford nodded. "And the shareholders?" "The ones who believe in stability," I said, "will support me." "And the ones who don't?" I smiled. "They can sell to me." Elena let out a soft laugh. "What's your official request?" Ashford asked. I placed a document on the table. Clear. Direct. Unshakable. "I am requesting appointment as CEO," I said. "Effective immediately. And long-term ownership through structured acquisition." Silence. Then. One yes. Then another. Then another. The votes came like falling dominoes. When the final vote was cast, I became CEO. The final confrontation. Victoria demanded a meeting with me. Not legally. Not professionally. Personally. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met in a quiet conference room, the same one where she first called me a reject. The symmetry was beautiful. She walked in slowly, her arrogance gone, replaced by disbelief. "You," she whispered. "You own my company?" "No," I said softly. "I own my company." She blinked. Once. Twice. "You'll destroy it," she said. "You're weak." "No," I said, "you were weak. That's why you needed to humiliate people. Strength doesn't scream, Victoria. Strength doesn't fear talent. Strength doesn't call people rejects." I stepped closer. "And strength builds what fear destroys." She trembled. She actually trembled. "You'll never be me," she hissed. I smiled. "I know. That's the point." I headed for the door. Before leaving, I paused and said the line I'd waited months to say. "You called me a reject. Now I sign your severance." Her breath caught. Her eyes widened. And for the first time since I met her, Victoria Hale had nothing to say. Owning the empire. The next morning, I walked into the building as its CEO. Employees lined the hallways. Some clapped softly. Some nodded in quiet respect. Some smiled, real smiles, not the fearful ones that used to follow her around. I stepped into my new office. Her office. Except it wasn't hers anymore. It was mine. I placed my binder, the binder that started it all, on the center of the desk. Then I turned around, looked at the skyline, and whispered. They called me a reject. But today, the company calls me CEO. And I smiled. Because I knew something she never understood. You don't rise by crushing others. You rise by surviving them. 11 days after the CFO tried to tank the company, Revell Dynamics was operating with the shaky steadiness of a wounded animal. Departments functioned. Systems ran. Employees worked. But something was different. They weren't afraid anymore. Of her. Of the system. Of the tyranny she built. Freedom is quiet at first. But you can feel it. And that quiet was the sound of power shifting, in my direction. The day the numbers turned. The stock had been declining slowly since the scandal began. But that morning, something unusual happened. It dipped. Hard. A sharper dip than expected, a flash downturn created by uncertainty, media speculation, and the CFO's attempted sabotage. To anyone else, it was bad news. To me, it was an invitation. A dip in valuation meant cheaper shares. Cheaper shares meant faster accumulation. Faster accumulation meant control. Priya called me from Treasury. Do you see the market? She asked. Yes. Are you nervous? No. She exhaled softly on the phone. You're really going to do it, aren't you? Yes, I said. I'm taking the company. I heard her smile through the line. The acquisition strike. Gavin moved fast. By noon, 3 private equity vehicles began buying shares quietly, small enough to avoid flashing on algorithms, strategic enough to stay unnoticed. Every purchase slid into my takeover blueprint like puzzle pieces finding their home. By evening, we held 11.7%. By the next morning, when the market dipped again, we held 18.3%. By day 3, 24.2%. A number that caused shivers at board level. At any other time, accumulating that much stock would have triggered alarm bells. But now? The company was in crisis. The board was desperate. Investors were skittish. Employees were frightened. The vultures Victoria always feared had arrived. But I wasn't a vulture. I was a surgeon. And the company needed surgery. People say you never forget the moment someone breaks you. For me, it happened at 11:14 a.m. on a Wednesday. The conference room smelled like burnt coffee and fresh toner, the usual scent of monthly performance reviews at Revell Dynamics, a mid-sized tech corporation with a very oversized ego. I sat at the far end of the glass table, clutching my portfolio, trying to steady my hands. I had spent 3 months preparing to present my optimization plan. 3 months collecting data, crafting a proposal, and building projections that could save the company over $8.4 million annually. 3 months believing that hard work still meant something. What a joke. Because that Wednesday morning, our CEO walked in, and everything changed. Her name was Victoria Hale, and she was a storm. Victoria never walked into rooms, she arrived. Shoes clicking like gunshots. Jaw tight with ambition. Eyes sharp enough to slice a soul in half. People straightened in their seats when she passed. Some smiled nervously. Some lowered their eyes. Some practically trembled. She wasn't just the CEO. She was a tyrant. Her reputation? Legendary. People said she'd fired a director because he sneezed during her presentation. Someone else once lost their job for questioning a number on her slide. Nobody crossed Victoria Hale. Nobody. Which is why, when I stood up in that room, junior analyst, quiet, unimportant, invisible, to present my optimization plan, every single person prayed she wouldn't notice me. But she did. God, she did. You? Presenting this? I took a breath and began. Good morning. I'd like to present a cost efficiency restructure that could. Victoria held up a hand. Not a full stop, just 2 fingers raised like she was silencing a misbehaving child. Gasps fluttered around the room. Her eyes raked over me, slow, unfiltered, and disgusted. Then she laughed. Loud. Sharp. A laugh with teeth. You're joking, she said. You're a junior analyst. Barely 2 years in. And you think anyone in this room wants to hear you talk numbers? My throat tightened. Ma'am, the data suggests. Oh, please. She rolled her eyes dramatically. If I wanted statistical summaries, I'd ask someone competent. A few managers shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away. No one spoke. But Victoria wasn't finished. Tell me, she said, folding her arms, which incompetent manager assigned you to this? I swallowed. No one assigned me. I worked on it independently. Of course you did. She sneered. Overeager rejects always do. Reject. The word was a bullet. I felt it pierce my chest, hot, brutal, humiliating. She stepped closer, heels tapping like a countdown to destruction. You're lucky this company hired you at all, Victoria said loudly enough for everyone to hear. And you're even luckier we let you touch a spreadsheet. But presenting to me? She scoffed. Stay in your lane. Rejects cause accidents. Then she turned to the VP beside her. Remove her from this project. And make sure she's not assigned anything critical again. I don't have time for charity cases. My lungs stopped working. The room blurred. Someone whispered. Someone tilted their head. The humiliation was thick, suffocating, relentless. When I tried to step down, my heel wobbled slightly. That made her laugh again. See? You can't even stand properly. And you want to talk business? The room erupted, not with support, not with courage. But with the silence of cowards. No one defended me. No one even blinked. Not when she humiliated me. Not when she dismissed me. Not when she called me a reject. I walked out of the conference room with my spine stiff and my heart shattering with every step. The aftermath hurt worse. By 3 p.m., the entire building knew. Whispers trailed behind me. That's the girl Victoria yelled at. She tried to present to the CEO. Why would she even try? She cried in the hallway, right? She's finished. I didn't cry. Not then. Not yet. Instead, I walked into the single-stall restroom on the 28th floor, locked the door, leaned my forehead against the mirror, and exhaled. My hands trembled. My throat burned. My entire body felt like it had been shoved underwater. Reject. The word echoed again and again. I stared at myself, red eyes, clenched jaw, shaking breath, and whispered. This isn't fair. But fairness doesn't survive in corporations. Power does. And Victoria Hale had all of it. But something changed in that mirror. My reflection looked fragile. Hurt. Defeated. But behind the hurt, there was something else. A spark. A flicker. A quiet fury I had never heard inside myself before. Reject? No. No, I wasn't. Not then. Not now. Not ever. She didn't know who I was. Or what I was capable of. She saw an analyst. She didn't see the girl who grew up decoding her father's accounting ledgers at age 8. The girl who could smell a financial loophole in her sleep. The girl who lived and breathed business because numbers were the only place she ever felt in control. Victoria didn't see a threat. She saw a reject. And that was her mistake. Because a reject has nothing left to lose. And nothing is more dangerous than someone with nothing to lose. That night, I made a promise. After work, I walked home, 10 blocks, traffic noise, and neon lights reflecting in puddles, lost in thought. I didn't go home sad. I didn't go home broken. I went home plotting. If she wanted me small, I'd grow in silence. If she wanted me mopped off her floors, I'd climb where she couldn't reach. If she wanted me weak, I'd become someone she would fear. By midnight, I had a notebook full of plans. By 2 a.m., I had researched every private equity mismatch in Revell Dynamics' financial footprint. By dawn, I knew exactly how fragile the empire Victoria Hale sat upon really was. She thought she was untouchable. She thought I was nothing. But she didn't know what I knew. She didn't know that the company she ran was drowning in hidden, mismanaged debt. Debt she had no idea how to untangle. Debt someone like me could use. Debt someone like me could own. And as the sun rose, one thought formed, clear, sharp, unstoppable. She called me a reject. But one day, I would own her entire company. The plan she never saw coming. When I left the building that night after Victoria called me a reject, I could have done 1,000 petty things. I could have ranted on LinkedIn, sent passive-aggressive emails, or slept badly and let anger hollow me out. Instead, I did the one thing that always steadied me. I started mapping. Not org charts, everyone has those. I mapped the company's vulnerabilities. I pulled everything I could find: public filings, analyst notes, vendor lists, regulatory disclosures, and the crumb trails people left online. I read board minutes that were public, dug into procurement contracts, and cross-checked vendor names against obscure offshore registries. I looked at debt covenants like a puzzle and the sales forecasts like weather reports. Small inconsistencies stood out to me the way a missing stitch stands out in a sweater. Revell Dynamics looked healthy from the outside. The press releases were polished. The employees polished their shoes and rehearsed their optimism. But under the sheen, there were small faults: loans with heavy dependence on projected cash flows, a rising accounts receivable bucket that had stopped aging correctly, and a cluster of vendor contracts that shifted revenue recognition in ways that made my teeth ache. Most alarming of all, Victoria's pet project, a series of acquisitions she'd pursued aggressively, had been financed with short-term bridges and optimistic earnouts that only worked if growth never hiccuped. Growth seldom moves in straight lines. I worked through the night, then the next night, then for a week. The more I dug, the less mysterious my anger became. Her insult had been personal cruelty, but the injustice here was structural. People were gambling investor money on vanity deals and disguising risk under managerial bravado. She needed others to believe the story she sold. She needed silence. She needed people like me to keep the widgets oiled. And that silence was breaking. The first strategic decision I made was simple: don't act like a victim. Act like an owner. Victims plead, owners plan. So I started building an ownership mindset, learning the language of private equity and M&A, understanding leverage, mastering covenant mechanics, and, crucially, collecting evidence of mismanagement in a way that could be used constructively later. A routine procurement audit flagged a supplier, Tandem Logistics, as having delivered services that didn't match invoices. Dina asked for help reconciling the discrepancies. The supplier name rang a bell. It had cropped up in one of the off-book side agreements I'd discovered. I volunteered. It was a small ask in a perfect wedge. The work was tedious: time sheets, delivery manifests, signed receipt stamps, but it yielded what I needed: proof that Tandem's invoices were being double-billed and that a portion of those funds had routed to a shell entity tied to an acquisition Victoria had championed. When I traced the bank paths, they curved through jurisdictions used for opacity. Not illegal on its face, yet, but suspicious enough to compel closer review. Armed with that file, I didn't run to HR or the difficulty-averse managers who had watched me flounder in the conference room. I approached Matteo in legal and Priya in treasury. I laid out what I'd found, calmly and materially. No drama. No flourish. Matteo's eyes narrowed. Priya's fingers moved faster across the keyboard. They both knew, on sight, how serious it could be. "Show me everything," Matteo said. We moved in a small, controlled circle, no chatter, no leaks. We created a shadow audit, an internal trail of questions sent formally through the procurement channel, a request for invoices to be resent, a demand for delivery confirmations. We asked for vendor contracts to be uploaded to the company's central repository, where version control made it hard to hide edits. Under the guise of routine compliance, we tightened the net. Victoria, in her corner office with the city as her backcloth, continued her theater, public appearances, keynote speeches, and carefully staged ribbon cuttings. She was brilliant at optics. The company loved spectacles, shareholders loved spectacle more. It was her currency. But the more she invested in spectacle, the more brittle the underlying structure became. Her acquisition earnouts rested on projected synergies that were already failing. Vendors linked to her projects were overbilling. Short-term liquidity was being disguised as operational optimization. The crucial pivot point came when I discovered a contractual clause buried inside the acquisition financing for one of Victoria's marquee deals. It was small and obliquely worded, tucked into annexes few read unless they were hunting for legal landmines, a put option that allowed the seller, or an affiliated special purpose vehicle, to demand immediate repurchase of key assets under certain trigger events. Those triggers were tied to EBITDA metrics that, given current trends, were at risk. In English, if performance faltered, the seller could pull assets back, creating a sudden hole in Ravel's balance sheet and forcing a massive cash outflow. In less polite language, a ticking bomb. Knowing that didn't make me gloat. It made me focus. I started to develop a plan with 3 tightly ordered moves. Consolidate proof. Make sure the anomalies were documented, timestamped, and cross-verified by Treasury and legal. Evidence had to be irrefutable. Protect allies. Ensure Dina, Matteo, and Priya had protections and copies of their communications. Whistleblowers are often crushed by loneliness. Protection is a strategic tool. Choose the right trigger. If the put option or the vendor double billing could force a liquidity event, we'd prepare to present it to the board and, if necessary, to regulators. The goal wasn't to destroy the company for spite, it was to remove the leverage Victoria used to crush dissent. Ideally, we'd force a restructuring that sidelined her, or create a market wobble that made acquisition by a principled entity a plausible outcome. All of this was slow. It required patience, spreadsheets, and the nerve to keep smiling while the woman who'd called me a reject strutted about like she owned the world. There were nights when I'd wake with my heart pounding, fingers twitching with the fear that one misstep could mean legal peril for me. But the binder in my bag, my quiet ledger of truth, kept me steady. And then, the moment I'd been waiting for presented itself like a gift with jagged edges. At a board meeting, Victoria announced, trumpet flourish and all, a new partnership that would instantly recognize revenue and stabilize the projections she'd been selling to investors. The partnership would be front-page material. It would cement her reputation and the company's stock price. Only it wouldn't. Because I'd already traced the partners' commitments to a shell company. And because the put option clause meant that once the revenue was recognized, the sellers could demand repurchase under a plausible pretext. Presenting this at the right moment would not be an act of vengeance. It would force transparency. When the board adjourned, Victoria basked in congratulations. She hadn't seen the calculations already humming in my head. She hadn't seen the way evidence and timing could convert embarrassment into authority. She thought she'd ruined me. She thought she'd won. She had only lit the match. The boardroom bomb. There are 2 kinds of boardrooms in the corporate world. The first is performative, sleek tables, too bright lighting, everyone pretending to agree with the strongest voice in the room. The second is surgical, a place where empires come apart in silence. Victoria Hale believed she ran the first kind. She didn't realize she had just stepped into the second. And I was about to open her chest with precision. The morning everything shifted. The board meeting was scheduled for 8 a.m. on a Thursday, the kind of cold morning where even the city looked tired. I arrived early. Not out of fear. Not out of nerves. Out of strategy. I wanted to see each board member as they entered, to watch which way their eyes moved, to hear the tone of their greetings. Board members are like weather systems. Their temperature tells you what kind of storm is coming. One by one, they filed in. Mr. Ashford, chairman, expression clipped as always. Elena Marquez, head of audit, calm and curious. Wesley Yorn, investor rep, ego with a tie. Claire DeVoe, quiet but razor sharp. And then Victoria Hale. The room shifted when she walked in. She wore confidence like armor, fitted suit, diamond earrings, her signature crimson lipstick. She didn't greet the board. She glided to her seat at the head of the table like she was entering her throne room. The other board members adjusted their papers, their posture, their faces. Everyone treated her as if she were carved from authority itself. Everyone, except me. I stood at the side of the room, a quiet observer with a binder tucked under my arm, the binder that held the truth she had no idea was coming. Her eyes landed on me. Hard. Cold. What is she doing here? Victoria snapped, voice carrying across the table with zero hesitation. Mr. Ashford didn't look up from his notes. She's here at my request. Her nostrils flared. What request? She's a junior analyst. I met her gaze without blinking. No, Mr. Ashford corrected calmly, closing his folder. She's the analyst who found discrepancies in your acquisition filings. The room went still. Victoria's jaw flexed. Hard. She turned toward me slowly, her expression dark enough to bruise. You just don't know when to stay in your lane, she said quietly. I smiled politely. That's what you told me last time, I replied. And yet, here we are. The revelation begins. The meeting began with routine matters, but no one cared. Everyone could feel the tension vibrating like a power line. Then Mr. Ashford folded his hands. Let's move to the irregularities, he said. Irregularities. A polite word for, Victoria, someone found your mess. Proceed, he nodded to me. My pulse slowed. My spine lengthened. This was the moment I'd built for weeks. I stepped forward and placed my binder on the table. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, I began, I'm presenting a financial review of the Tandem Logistics Partnership and its impact on the Hale acquisition series. Victoria crossed her arms aggressively, glaring holes through me. Get to the point, she snapped. I did. 3 months ago, I identified duplicated invoice structures and off-book payments routed through a shell entity tied to the acquisition you approved. Murmurs. Brows furrowed. Pens paused midair. I continued. These transfers artificially inflated earnings before the merger. They were concealed across multiple vendor agreements. That's enough, Victoria interrupted, slamming her palm on the table. Her voice climbed in volume. You're accusing me of fraud. I'm presenting documented evidence, I said, completely steady. Whether it qualifies as fraud is up to the auditors. Her face reddened. She turned to the board. Are you all seriously listening to this? She's a junior nobody. She's bitter because she embarrassed herself in a meeting months ago. Mr. Ashford cut in sharply. This is not personal, Victoria. We verified her claims. The color drained from her face. But before the debate could begin, a voice burst into the room. Victoria. Uninvited. Unhinged. Security had clearly failed to stop her. She stormed in, hair wild, eyes bloodshot. You can't replace me, she screamed. She's a reject. A nobody. A pathetic little. Ashford slammed his palm down. That's enough, Victoria. Security rushed in, grabbing her arms. But she wriggled free long enough to point directly at me. You will never run this company, she hissed. They'll never trust you. Never. I stepped forward. Her eyes bulged. That's where you're wrong, I said softly. They already do. Her knees buckled. Security dragged her out, kicking and cursing. The board stared at me, stunned into silence. Then Ashford said quietly, "Miss, what exactly are your ambitions?" I met his gaze. Not humbly. Not timidly. Steady. Clear. To take this company where Victoria couldn't. And to own it one day. A long silence followed. Then Elena smiled, faint, approving. "She's the only one with a spine in this room," she said. The vote wasn't unanimous. But it was enough. 8 minutes later, I walked out of that boardroom as the interim chief operations executive, a stepping stone. Not the throne yet. But close. Very close. You're now in power. Victoria is spiraling. The board is split. Investors are circling. And Gavin is preparing the acquisition plan you'll lead. Now comes the clash. Shall I continue with the war for control? Becoming interim COO didn't feel like victory. It felt like stepping onto a battlefield. A battlefield with no gunshots, only signatures, alliances, and numbers that could ruin lives. People think power makes everything easier. It doesn't. Power makes everything visible. And visibility attracts enemies. Victoria had been one kind of danger, loud, cruel, predictable. The board? The investors? The executives who survived her downfall? They were a different kind of danger. "You verified them?" "Yes," he said. "Our external auditors matched her findings exactly." Now, the room shifted. The surgeons had noticed the tumor. I turned a page. And that brings us to the put option clause embedded in the acquisition. If the inflated earnings fail to meet projections. Wesley suddenly leaned forward. That triggers the seller's right to call back key assets. Exactly, I said. And doing so would require an immediate repayment of $74 million. The air left the room. $74 million. In cash. Victoria sputtered, "That clause was theoretical." "No," I corrected gently, "that clause was activated last quarter." She froze. Completely. I watched realization crush her like a tidal wave. She had known the acquisition was shaky. She had known earnings were less than projected. But she didn't know the seller had already filed the activation notice with legal. A notice Matteo forwarded to me. And that notice was sitting neatly in my binder. The board turns. Ashford flipped through the documents with a look of disdain. "You didn't disclose any of this," he said to Victoria. "I didn't know," she stammered. "Why not?" Claire asked, eyes narrowed. "You signed the filings." Victoria's breath hitched. She scanned the faces around the table, searching for an ally. She found none. Her voice softened, desperate. I trusted my team." I looked right at her. "You trusted us," I said quietly, "only when it suited you." Her head snapped toward me. "If you speak again, I swear I will." "You will do nothing," said Ashford sharply. "This is now a board-level compliance issue." She paled. Wesley leaned back in his chair, arms folded. "If these numbers go public, our stock plummets. We'll be eaten alive by competitors." Claire added, "And regulators will file charges." Victoria's lips trembled. For the first time, the woman who humiliated me in front of a room full of executives looked afraid. And that fear was deserved. The bomb drops. I flipped to the final page, a single sheet. "This," I said, "is the seller's formal request for asset buyback. Effective immediately." Dead silence. "This will destroy us," Wesley said. "No," I corrected, "this will destroy her. The company can survive with intervention. But she cannot." Victoria shot to her feet, voice cracking. "You," she pointed at me, "you planned this. You want my seat." I stared at her calmly. No, I said. I want honesty. You just happened to be standing in front of it. The board murmured again. Ashford closed the binder and exhaled. Victoria Hale, he said, voice icy, effective immediately, you are suspended pending full investigation. Her face shattered. You can't do this, she hissed. I built this company. No, I whispered, stepping closer, the employees built it. You just bullied them. And then. She lunged toward me, furious, unhinged. Security stepped in instantly. 2 guards caught her arms and held her back. Her voice echoed violently through the chamber. You're a reject. You're nothing. You will never. She didn't finish. Because that was the moment they escorted her out. And the boardroom stayed silent. Except for Ashford, who turned to me and said softly, Miss, I don't know what your ambitions are, but this company is going to need someone like you. My stomach flipped. I didn't smile. Not yet. Because this was just beginning. This was the removal. Not the takeover. Victoria has been suspended. The board is rattled. You have the evidence, the leverage, and the rising respect. Now the company is vulnerable. And vulnerable companies attract buyers. Shall I continue with the takeover play? Removing Victoria wasn't the victory. It was the opening. The moment her heels clicked out of that boardroom under security escort, something subtle shifted in the company. Fear didn't vanish, it mutated. People who once bowed to Victoria now looked around uncertainly, as if waking from a long, violent sleep. Department heads whispered outside glass offices. Directors read memos 3 times. Senior staff exchanged looks that asked a single question. Who's in charge now? Not officially me. Not yet. But unofficially? Eyes followed me in hallways. People held elevators for me. My inbox exploded with questions, requests, and data inquiries. The company didn't fear me, not like they feared her. But they were beginning to trust me. And trust is fuel. Fuel for something bigger. Something the universe never intended her to see coming. My takeover. Learning the weak points. I spent the next 48 hours studying Ravel dynamics like a doctor studying a patient's chart. Half of the company was strong. Half was duct tape disguised as strategy. Victoria's acquisitions were the weakest joints, overvalued, overleveraged, and structurally unsustainable without the illusion she maintained so aggressively. When that illusion cracked, everything wobbled. I was in my apartment, sitting cross-legged on the floor surrounded by documents, when Matteo, legal, called me. You know the board is panicking, right? He said. Of course, I replied. Panic is predictable. They're debating leadership options. Interim CEO, restructuring, forming a crisis committee. And they don't trust any of their internal executives. I smirked. Victoria had spent years breaking people to protect her throne. Now there was no one she hadn't broken. That gives me room, I said, flipping through balance sheets. Room, he echoed. To do what? To buy the company. The silence on the line was loud. Finally. You're serious. Very. Matteo exhaled hard. You're going to need capital, he said. And allies. Real ones. I already have both, I said, glancing at the list I'd built. He paused. You planned this far ahead? No, I corrected gently, I plan to survive. The takeover is simply the evolution of survival. Allies in the shadows. 3 people became my foundation. 1, Priya, Treasury. Quiet. Brilliant. She knew the company's liquidity better than anyone alive. If she drifted toward me, even subtly, it signaled to others that I wasn't a risk. I was stability. 2, Elena Marquez, internal audit lead. A board member with spine and integrity. She'd seen Victoria's tyranny up close. I didn't need her endorsement. I needed her respect. 3. Gavin Roth, external investor. This one was delicate. Gavin was a venture capitalist known for salvaging dying companies and buying them cheap. He loved vulnerability, he respected competence. I met him once at a conference. Just once. I remembered how his eyes sharpened when I dissected a data model. He remembered, too, he'd emailed me once, months ago, asking why Victoria's reports seemed too aligned to be real. He wasn't wrong. He was my wild card. The first move. The night after Victoria's suspension, I emailed Gavin. Subject: Revel Dynamics, opportunity for strategic entry. He responded in 14 minutes. When can we talk? I sent him a file at midnight. At 12:17 a.m., he called. Holy, he caught his breath. These numbers are a disaster. Correct. And you have all this documented? Yes. Is the board aware? Partially. A pause. You want to lead the recovery, he said. Not a question, a statement. Yes. And you want me to back your bid? Yes. Why you? I smiled softly. Because I know the company's structure from the inside. Because I know the real numbers. Because Victoria taught everyone to fear talent. And because I'm the only one who actually understands how to fix the mess she created. Silence again. Then. You know this means going to war. The board won't roll over. I don't need them to roll over, I said. I need them to choose the lesser danger. And you'll make yourself the safer option? No, I replied. I'll make Victoria the nightmare option. Gavin laughed darkly. Send me the whole binder. I'll run my team on valuation analysis. I did. At 3 a.m., he texted. You may actually pull this off. The board starts to crumble. The next morning, Revel Dynamics was crawling with tension. Executives walked faster. Analysts avoided eye contact. Rumors crackled through hallways like static. At 10:30 a.m., a confidential board meeting was called. I wasn't supposed to be in it. But Elena Marquez, audit lead, waved me in with one hand. Victoria wasn't there, of course. She was home, or in an attorney's office, or in a luxury hotel tearing apart room service. The board looked exhausted. Ashford cleared his throat. As you know, we need to appoint an interim CEO. Someone muttered, we need someone who won't destroy the stock further. Another whispered, we can't trust any of the VPs. They all followed Victoria blindly. Arguments broke out. Names were thrown around. None fit. Not one. Then, Elena glanced at me. Why not her, she said. Every head turned. My heart thudded once. Ashford frowned. She's not executive level. She's the only reason we caught the discrepancies in the first place, she countered. And she's the only person who actually understands the structure I've spent 2 days drowning in. There was a beat of silence. Then Wesley snorted. A junior analyst as interim CEO? This is absurd. I didn't flinch. Gentlemen, Elena said slowly, absurdity would be putting another one of Victoria's loyalists in charge. She led us blind. This woman let us out.